The prince's twin children wouldn't eat anything, until the new cook did something that left him speechless. The carriage wheels turned noiselessly over the gravel, as Celeste Chevalier sat motionless in the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The last bend of the winding road revealed Chateau Montbrun at last, a great, brooding silhouette of gray stone carved into the side of the mountain, like a fortress masquerading as a home. Ivy crept along its time-worn facade, clinging to the pointed arches and towering mullioned windows, some of which had been left dark, even as afternoon faded into evening. The year was 1842, and though spring had settled over the southern borderlands of the Florum Principality, the high air still carried a chill that bit through her traveling cloak. She glanced out the window once more, not for the view but for breath, steadying herself. A cook's position, even in the lower kitchens of a royal household, was not easily gained. She had fought to be here, through the scorn of former employers, the whispers that followed her out of Paris, and the silence of too many unanswered letters. And now that she'd arrived, her only task was to keep her head down and her hands steady. The steward who met her at the kitchen entrance was as sharp as she'd expected, Sir Bertrand, with eyes like a hawk and a voice as crisp as cold linen. He walked her through the servant corridors without ceremony. "You'll speak only when addressed," he said, not looking at her. "Keep your eyes low. No fraternizing with the staff. And under no circumstances are you to speak to or approach the children." She nodded once. "Everything is different here," he added after a pause. "You'll see." He left her at the entrance to the scullery, where the bustle of copper pots and scraping knives sounded like a heartbeat. Inside, the lower kitchens were cavernous and warm, lit by hearthlight and candle sconces, the ceilings low and curved like a wine cellar. The scent of yeast and starch hung thick in the air, and the rhythm of work was practiced and wordless. Celeste took her place at the chopping table, set her satchel beneath it, and tied on her apron. The uniform was familiar, but the silence that ruled the kitchen unnerved her. There was no laughter, no swearing, no clatter of casual talk. Only the sounds of labor, carefully measured. Each servant, from the youngest scullion to the master cook himself, moved with the hush of people living beneath something vast and unspoken. By the end of her first week, she'd come to understand what it was. Grief. Not fresh grief, but the kind that had hardened into the walls. It was everywhere. In the muted silverware, in the somber gowns of the head housekeeper, in the way the chimneys were cleaned twice a day but never lit to full brightness. A year before, Princess Emilienne had vanished without explanation, and though no one dared to name her dead, no one seemed to believe she would return. Her absence hovered like smoke. The entire palace had drawn in on itself. Most affected were the children, 6-year-old twins, the young Prince Lucien and Princess Adelaide, born to inheritance and silence alike. Their mother had last been seen tucking them in one April night. The next morning, her chamber had been found empty, her slippers still beside the bed. No one spoke of it openly. No one ever spoke of her at all. Celeste did not see the children up close in those early days, only caught glimpses of them as they passed through the corridors between the nursery and the courtyard. They were small and still, ghost-like figures trailing behind nursemaids who did not speak to them. They did not play. They did not laugh. Their faces were pale as sugar icing, their eyes dulled with something too deep for childhood. One afternoon, after the kitchen rush had died down and most of the staff had scattered, she found herself alone in the back pantry, surrounded by flour and cooling bread. The quiet felt thick, but not empty. She had a memory then of her grandmother in Arles, kneading dough on an old table by the window, the sun pouring through geranium leaves, the scent of lemon and almond thick in the air. Without thinking, Celeste reached for the sack of sugar. She worked quickly, her sleeves rolled high, her hands steady. Eggs were whisked into warm milk. Almond flour folded in with sugar. The tart crust, simple pâte brisée, rolled and filled before being slipped into the oven. No elaborate presentation, no molded fruit or gilded glazes, just a custard tart, rustic and honest, the kind a child might remember from before the world had gone quiet. As it baked, the scent bloomed into the air, golden and warm, citrus and vanilla curling through the narrow hall like a forgotten lullaby. She didn't think much of it. She certainly didn't expect the light footsteps at the edge of the threshold. When she looked up, two small figures stood just outside the kitchen door. The girl had her brother's hand clasped tightly in hers, as if the contact alone tethered her to the present. Their eyes were wide, but not frightened. They did not speak. They did not look at her, only at the tart cooling on the rack. Celeste did not move. Instinct told her stillness would not frighten them away, but motion might. After a long, fragile moment, Adélaïde stepped forward, her slippered feet silent on the stone floor. Lucienne followed. Together they approached the work table where the tart sat steaming gently in its tin. Without glancing up, the girl reached for a spoon. Celeste did not stop her. They ate in silence. Small bites. Slow, deliberate movements. Their eyes remained downcast, as if fearing they would be stopped, as if not entirely certain the food was real. It was the first time anyone had seen them eat. The tart vanished in minutes, neatly, politely, without haste. When they were done, Adélaïde licked a bit of custard from her fingertip. Lucien held the empty spoon in his hand, as if uncertain where to put it down. Neither spoke. But they didn't need to. Celeste could feel the difference in the air, as if a cord that had long been strung too tight had finally loosened. She didn't realize the kitchen door had opened again until the stillness shifted. There was no sound, only a shift in pressure, an invisible pull of attention, like the hush before a storm. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on the edge of her apron. The man standing in the doorway was tall, broader in the shoulders than she had expected, his presence made heavier by the rigid posture of royalty and years of silent grief. His frock coat was midnight blue, cut to perfect formality, and the crest of Florum gleamed on the golden buttons at his chest. His hair was swept back from his brow, catching the firelight in deep chestnut tones. His eyes were pale, colder than steel, but not empty. They were fixed on the children, on their mouths, on the empty plate. Celeste didn't breathe. He stepped further into the kitchen, the echo of his boots dulled by the stone. His eyes moved slowly to meet hers. Something flickered there. Surprise, yes, but also something older, something raw. His voice, when it came, was low and tight. "What did you just do to my children?" The scent of scorched wood lingered in the kitchen hearth the morning after the custard tart, though no fire had burned since before dawn. Celeste stood at the table where the children had sat the day before, her hands folded tightly around a wooden spoon, as if its shape might offer some kind of direction. She had hardly slept. The prince's words, shocked, restrained, utterly bewildered, still echoed in her chest. "What did you just do to my children?" Nothing had followed. No dismissal, no commendation, no word at all. Only silence. And then, not 2 hours later, a message sent down from the steward's office bearing Prince Sebastien's seal. "Miss Celeste Chevalier is henceforth assigned to the private meal preparation of their Highnesses Prince Lucien and Princess Adélaïde. She is to report to the upper nursery kitchen until further notice." The scroll had been delivered with no greeting and less explanation. Still, it caused a quiet eruption in the servants' wing. Eyebrows raised, tongues whispered behind cupped hands. She had been in the household for less than a fortnight, and now she was elevated beyond 3 other kitchen maids with more years and cleaner reputations. No one said it directly to her. They didn't need to. The stares from across the hearth were hard enough. One of the older cooks, Madame Léonard, paused in the middle of beating a row of egg whites and muttered just loud enough for her apprentice to hear, "I suppose you don't need talent when you've got something else." Celeste kept her gaze low and her breath slow. She had earned nothing, she told herself. Only been lucky. A spoonful of custard, a spark in 2 grieving children. It had meant nothing, hadn't it? But when she arrived at the smaller nursery kitchen the next morning, an intimate space just off the royal children's apartments lined with polished oak counters and cream-glazed crockery, she found the twins already waiting for her. Lucien was seated on the windowsill, a book in his lap, though he didn't turn a page. Adélaïde stood beside the pantry, one hand curled around the edge of the shelf, watching her. Neither spoke. Still, they waited. Celeste's breath caught somewhere just below her ribs. She gave them a small nod and tied her apron, turning to begin. She started small, soft stewed apples with honey, toasted oat bread brushed with butter and crushed almond. No court sauces, no elegant garnishes. Only warmth and quiet things. Food that had known love before it ever knew a recipe. The children responded slowly at first, but they ate. Not all, and not quickly, but enough. A quarter of a slice, 2 bites of compote. One evening, Adélaïde finished a dish of warm milk with vanilla, then looked at Celeste for a single moment before turning away again. It was progress. As the days passed, the children began appearing earlier, lingering longer. They brought books, folded napkins into quiet shapes. Lucien, who had not spoken in a year, pressed his forehead to his sister's and whispered a word she did not hear. But Sebastian did. He had come to the nursery door to retrieve a report from the tutor when the boy spoke, soft as moth wings, almost lost to the hum of the kitchen fire. The prince didn't startle, didn't react at all. He only stood there, his hand still extended toward the tutor, as if turned to stone. Then he left without a word. In the following days, Sebastien appeared more often. Never inside the room, only at its periphery. From behind open doors, along the corridor rail, high on the balcony above the garden, where the kitchen's side window opened just enough to catch his outline. He said nothing, but his presence changed the air. Celeste, for her part, kept her head down and her movements measured. Yet she felt his eyes on her, when she handed Adélaïde a linen napkin folded into a bird, when she leaned over to adjust Lucien's spoon. And though she didn't look toward him, she always knew when he was there. He was a man carved in quiet. A prince, yes, but more than that. A father who had lost the world and hadn't dared ask for another. By midsummer, the twins had adopted new habits. They left their chambers without being summoned. They began carrying things, small things, back to the kitchen. A daisy picked from the garden, a torn piece of sheet music, a white handkerchief that smelled faintly of cinnamon and almond. Once, Celeste found Adélaïde asleep on the bench near the hearth, a forgotten biscuit crumbled in her lap. The girl's hand still curled around it. Then came the banquet. It was held in honor of the Northern Allies, a trading alliance the kingdom depended on for its timber and grain, and the palace had been preparing for days. Every able hand was summoned for polishing, garnishing, plating. Celeste expected to be left to the nursery, as always, but the request came from the master cook himself. She was to prepare the final dessert for the nobles' table. Not the palace's standard molded sugar swans or candied rose petals, but something authentic, he said. Something simple, but stirring. Something only she, evidently, could provide. The tension in the kitchen was immediate. Celeste did not respond to the stares. She merely worked. She chose a spiced pear galette, brushed with orange glaze and scattered with sliced almonds, baked until the crust turned the color of burnished gold. It was the kind of dessert that did not ask for attention, but earned it. She carried it to the outer edge of the banquet hall herself. The room was high-ceilinged and echoing, lit with chandeliers that glittered against white marble. The air smelled of crushed lavender and roasted venison. She did not step inside, only paused at the carved archway to await instructions. And then she felt it, his gaze. Prince Sebastian was seated at the central table, flanked by visiting nobles and courtiers, his face as inscrutable as always. But his eyes had turned toward her. The glance was brief, so brief one might have missed it. yet it was unmistakable. A single moment of recognition in a sea of glass and ceremony. Beside him, Lady Violette d'Armançon, resplendent in violet silk and garnet jewels, followed his gaze. Her smile remained fixed. Later that night, when the kitchens had fallen into post-banquet quiet, Celeste was wiping down the cooled surface of the pastry table when she heard footsteps, soft and deliberate, enter behind her. "Such a lovely tart," came a voice like sugared wine. A bit rustic for court, perhaps, but one cannot fault sincerity. Celeste turned to find Lady Violette, her gloved hands clasped neatly, the scent of lilac trailing behind her. "I hope it pleased your ladyship," Celeste murmured, lowering her gaze. "Oh, it did. It pleased quite a few, I imagine." Violette tilted her head. "Tell me, dear, do you know how many cooks have come through this chateau in the past year?" Celeste hesitated. "No, my lady. 10. Her voice was soft, but cool. 10, and not one managed to do what you did. Quite a feat, wouldn't you say? I only meant to help the children." "Of course you did," Violette said, smiling gently. "Just a word of advice, from one woman to another. A cook's place is in the kitchen. It's a safe place, warm, familiar. But above those stairs, things are different. People remember things up there. Things like lineage, position, class." Celeste didn't answer. "Do be careful," Violette said, brushing an invisible speck from her glove. "This palace has long memories." She left without waiting for a reply. The next morning, a sealed envelope arrived on Celeste's cutting board, thicker parchment than usual, the royal crest embossed in wax. The words within were brief. She was to present herself at noon to Prince Sebastien, not in the nursery kitchen, but in his private study. The clock above the second-floor corridor struck 12, its chime solemn and deliberate, echoing down the long spine of Chateau Montbrun. Celeste stood just outside the carved oak door of the prince's private study, her hands laced tightly at her waist, the letter still folded in her apron pocket. The hallway was deserted, the kind of silence reserved for high places and private decisions. It was not the kind of place a kitchen maid, or even a favored cook, was ever meant to be. She had wiped her hands 3 times since leaving the nursery kitchen, but the faint scent of nutmeg and flour still clung to her fingers. Her dress, though clean, felt suddenly too simple for the richly paneled corridor. Her hair, pinned in its usual loose knot, threatened to escape at the temples, damp with nervous heat. She lifted her hand, paused, then knocked once. A pause, then a voice, low and unmistakable. "Enter." She pushed the door open. The room was dim despite the afternoon light. Heavy curtains blocked most of the sun, and the tall windows opened only slightly to let in the cooling scent of rain. The walls were lined with dark walnut shelves, filled with books in leather bindings, scrolls, and carefully labeled ledgers. A worn rug, threadbare at the corners, stretched beneath a large writing desk stacked with correspondence. The scent of vellum, wax, and the faintest trace of pipe smoke hung in the air. Prince Sebastien stood at the far end, one hand resting on the back of a leather armchair, the other holding a sheet of paper he no longer seemed to be reading. He was not wearing a sash or ceremonial coat, only a dark frock of fine wool and an ivory shirt with no cravat, as if court protocol had been stripped away with the hour. His hair was slightly mussed, and the skin beneath his eyes looked shadowed, as if sleep had not been his companion the night before. Celeste lowered her gaze. "You sent for me, Your Highness." He folded the paper with slow precision, placed it on the desk, and regarded her in silence for a long moment. "I did." When he spoke, it was with none of the sharp formality she had heard in the halls. His voice was calm, tempered, but not distant. The fire in the hearth crackled softly. "I don't typically summon kitchen staff," he said, "nor do I question my children's preferences. But this—" He moved slightly, the lamplight casting gold against the deep navy of his coat. "This has been unexpected." She stayed still. I asked you here because I find myself at a loss. My children have been unreachable for over a year, since their mother vanished. His gaze flickered, but did not waver. Physicians' tutors, women trained in a dozen kinds of patients. None of them succeeded where you seem to have done so without effort. It wasn't without effort, Your Highness, she said softly. His mouth tilted, something like the beginning of a smile, though it never fully formed. They eat when you feed them. They speak now, if only in whispers. They look for you. I only cook for them, she said, though her voice felt thinner than before. He took a step closer. No, it's not the food. Their eyes met then, clearly, without the veil of hierarchy or pretense. In that look was everything that had been left unspoken. Grief, loneliness, the weight of expectations neither of them had asked for. Something shifted in the air between them, not with force but with quiet gravity. He inclined his head, just slightly. Thank you. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came. The moment passed. He returned to his desk and picked up the page he had folded. You may return to your duties. She curtsied, her limbs stiffer than usual. Yes, Your Highness. But as she turned to go, she felt it, that unspoken thing still hanging between them. Neither of them reached for it. Not yet. But neither could deny its presence. In the days that followed, the air between them became charged. He watched her more openly now, not in a way that drew attention, but with a quiet focus that could not be mistaken. She would feel it before she saw it. In the garden corridor, during a lesson with the children, delivering trays near the staircase landing, he was there, sometimes still as a statue, sometimes speaking with an advisor, but always aware of her. And she felt it too. A hand brushed in passing when she handed him a folded note from the tutor. An accident, brief and breathless. A glance held too long when their paths crossed outside the nursery. His eyes, pale and restless, lingered on her with a weight she couldn't ignore. She tried. She asked the head steward to reassign her to her original station in the lower kitchens, cited the disruption, the discomfort of the attention. The answer came not from the steward, but from the twins. That morning, neither child touched their food. They sat in stiff, defiant silence, Lucien with his hands folded on the table, Adélaïde with her eyes fixed on the door. Word reached the prince within the hour. Celeste was not reassigned. No words were spoken about it, but the matter was closed. She returned to them, and the twins responded as though she had never been gone. Lucien leaned against her side during the afternoon meal. Adélaïde tucked a folded paper flower into her apron pocket. And when Sebastian passed by the threshold that evening, he paused, and this time, she didn't look away. That small world, those meals, those moments, became its own rhythm. A rhythm of glances and unspoken understanding, where affection passed between bowls of soup and softened bread. But not all eyes looked kindly upon it. Lady Violette moved through the palace with the precision of someone who knew where power lived. She had seen the prince's glance at the banquet, had seen the cook standing in the archway, silent and modest, and altogether too present. Within days, a letter was sent to Paris, a request for information regarding a certain young woman once employed in a noble household. The reply came swiftly, a dismissal, a rumor, nothing proven, but enough. And then the whispers began. Among the footmen, the housekeepers, even the court advisers, a cook with a scandal in her past, dismissed under questionable circumstances. Surely a prince should not place his children in such company. Celeste heard them, first faintly, then more clearly. A senior governess cornered her near the linen room, repeating the gossip with a falsely sympathetic tone. "It's always a shame," the woman said, her smile brittle. "You rise so far, only to fall harder." Celeste didn't reply. That evening, when the clouds pressed low over the mountains and the gardens were slick with rain, she slipped away. Past the scullery doors, through the lower corridor, into the overgrown courtyard behind the servants' wing. It was not the manicured upper garden where nobles strolled, but a forgotten patch of mossy stone and wild green. She found the fountain, the one with the lion's head weathered smooth, and sank onto the stone ledge beneath its arch. The rain had turned to mist, gentle and steady. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Only sat with her hands clasped and her breath shallow. A footstep behind her. She turned. Sebastian stood there, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat, his hair damp at the temples. He said nothing for a long moment. "I come here sometimes," he said finally, "when the halls are too heavy." She lowered her gaze. "I didn't mean to be seen." "You've been seen since the moment you arrived." The silence stretched. He moved closer. "I know what they're saying." She looked up, startled. "I've heard every word," he said. "And still, when I walk into the room and see my children laughing, I don't care." A sharp breath caught in her throat. "You've changed something here," he said, quieter now. "Not just them, the halls, the air, even the way the windows open in the morning. It used to feel like nothing moved. Now..." He stepped close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through the mist. Her heart pounded. "I don't know how you did it. I only know I've spent a year in silence, and the first time I heard my son speak again, it was after you." The rain softened against the ivy leaves above them. She looked up at him, lips parted, unsure if breath or words might come first. He leaned in, slowly, his breath stirring the curls at her temple. Then he stopped. "If I kiss you," he said, voice low, rough, "I won't stop." From the moment the words left his mouth in the rain-soaked garden, "If I kiss you, I won't stop," something between them changed. Not with scandal or recklessness, but with quiet inevitability. They parted without a touch, without another word, yet the air between them no longer carried the indifference it once did. It carried something else now, something warmer, unspoken, undeniable. In the days that followed, Sebastian's presence in her world became more frequent. Never inappropriate, never overt, but different. He began stopping by the nursery kitchen with brief, unnecessary questions. The children's preferences, the midday menus, the temperature of Lucien's milk. He stayed longer each time, his posture looser, his expression less remote. And always, his eyes found hers. He came once during the early afternoon, under the pretense of reviewing the tutor's notes. The children were in the garden, supervised by the head nurse. Celeste had just placed a tray of preserved lemon biscuits on the sideboard. He didn't speak at first, just watched her work. Her fingers were dusted in sugar. She could feel his gaze as keenly as if it were a hand at her back. "Did you always want to be a cook?" he asked quietly. She glanced up. "No." His mouth tilted. "What then?" "A bookbinder," she said after a pause. "Before I found I had more comfort in kitchens than in silence." He stepped closer. "That surprises me. I was apprenticed once, in Arles. The shop was old, beautiful. I used to press marigolds between the pages before the covers were glued on." "Why did you leave?" "I didn't. I was asked not to return." She turned back to the countertop, her hands moving automatically over a bowl of honeyed figs. He didn't press her, and she didn't explain. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It settled between them like a shared blanket, the kind that insulated rather than isolated. In return, he told her of his early marriage. He had been 19, Emilienne 16. Their union had been arranged by the council before he'd ever kissed her hand. She'd been beautiful, clever, dutiful, but never truly happy at court. She missed the freedom of her childhood estate and hated the attention her crown demanded. "We were companions more than lovers," he said. "We had affection, certainly, but not closeness, not in the way that mattered. And the children, they were her pride, my miracle, the best thing we ever made together." His voice caught then, just faintly. Celeste didn't look at him. She didn't need to. After that afternoon, they stopped pretending. Their conversations became longer. Not just about the children, but about everything else. Regret, duty, the strange isolation of being needed but never known. There were no declarations, no grand confessions, but affection hummed between them in every glance, every breath, every moment too long for comfort. Late one evening, well after the kitchens had quieted and the palace had folded itself into sleep, Sebastien returned. She was still wiping down the long counter where she'd rolled dough earlier. The room smelled of flour and heat. He stepped into the doorway, and she straightened as if summoned. "Why are you still working?" he asked. "There's always something to clean." He approached her slowly, as if cautious not to break the spell of quiet. When he reached her, he didn't speak. He took her hand, softly, carefully, and held it between his. She didn't pull away. He studied her face, eyes dark with something deeper than want, something close to need. Then he leaned in and kissed her. The first kiss was slow, hesitant, like a question. Her breath caught. His thumb traced the side of her wrist. She responded without fear, without permission, only longing. The second kiss was different, urgent, certain. A year of silence breaking open in a moment neither of them could stop. Afterward, he held her close, his cheek pressed to her temple, his breath uneven. They met in quiet places, briefly, tenderly, always with the knowledge that what they shared was precious and precarious. In the corners of unused corridors, in the back of the nursery when the children were asleep. They never lingered long. Their stolen moments were threaded with restraint, but also with an intimacy that ran deeper than touch. Each time he looked at her, it was as if he were seeing the only light in a long night. Celeste had never known such gentleness from a man. He did not claim, he did not expect. He simply looked at her as if she were real in a world that often forgot she was. But that world had not forgotten her. Lady Violette had not. Whispers that had once been murmurs now crept into conversations with weight and purpose. Violette intensified her manipulation of the council, warning that the prince's affections were clouded, that his grief had lingered too long. She proposed, with poised confidence, that it was time to secure the throne with a proper union, one that restored stability and silenced rumors. She named herself. She argued not from vanity, but from strategy, her lineage impeccable, her influence vast, her loyalty proven. The council, worn thin by months of quiet uncertainty, did not reject her. Instead, they agreed on an ultimatum. Prince Sebastien must announce a formal engagement by the autumn court session, or risk being declared politically unfit to continue the regency. The decision was made in whispers behind chamber doors. But soon, the palace buzzed with it, and the rumors about Celeste flared again. This time, more sharply. Servants whispered of her dismissal from the Parisian household, painting the story in lurid colors. Scandal, seduction, disgrace. The truth, that she had been sabotaged by a jealous noblewoman after refusing improper advances, was never asked for. Celeste heard the stories, not from a stranger, but from a kitchen maid who repeated them too quickly, her eyes too curious. She returned to her quarters that evening and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The room smelled of rose soap and lavender starch. Her apron was still folded on the chair, the children's breakfast menu half written on the desk. She opened her trunk. She began to pack in silence. She folded her shawl, her extra apron, the tin of dried orange peels she used to flavor cream. She touched the spoon-shaped pendant she kept hidden beneath her collar and left it where it lay. The sky outside her window had begun to darken. A soft knock. She didn't answer. The door opened anyway. Sebastien stepped inside, his face drawn, his coat still damp with mist. "You weren't going to tell me," he said quietly. She turned, startled. I had to hear it from a steward, that you were preparing to leave." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He closed the door behind him. "They've given me an ultimatum," he said. "Marry by autumn, or step aside. They think grief has weakened me. That affection has made me blind." She looked away. He stepped closer. "You're not the mistake, Celeste. They are. Every one of them who believes love is weakness." She couldn't breathe. "I haven't asked you anything," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not until now, but I will." He paused, and she knew this was it. The moment where all the quiet, trembling lines between them would finally be crossed. "If I gave up everything," he said, voice rough with hope, "would you stay?" Celeste stood motionless, her heart aching, her answer trapped somewhere just behind her ribs. By dawn, she was gone. No footstep marked her exit. No servant remembered her passing. The room she had quietly occupied near the rear of the nursery corridor was empty, the blanket neatly folded at the foot of the narrow cot, the small wash-basin dry and shining. Her apron still hung on the back of the chair, as though she might return in an hour's time and tie it back around her waist. But she would not. Only one thing had been left behind: a sealed envelope, resting atop the children's breakfast tray, addressed in careful handwriting, to Adélaïde and Lucien. Nothing more. Not even her name. The kitchens, always alive before sunrise, were quiet. Someone lit the stoves, but no chatter followed. Bread was kneaded with slower hands. Knives moved through vegetables without rhythm. Madame Léonard muttered about absent help, but even her sharpness lacked edge. A cook had left. Nothing more. But it felt as if the center of something had gone missing. Upstairs, the silence was louder. The twins said nothing. They sat at their usual places, identical silver spoons laid before them. Neither reached for the soft boiled eggs or the warm milk sweetened with honey. Adélaïde folded the envelope in her lap, refusing to let go. Lucien only stared at his plate as if waiting for something to appear that never would. When Sebastian entered the nursery salon and found them like that, motionless, pale and unreachable, he stopped mid-step. A tutor turned to greet him, but the prince raised a hand and said nothing. He read the room in a glance, and he understood. He left the salon and walked the corridors alone. He did not call for guards. He did not send a summons. He bypassed the steward's office and the morning report and the tray of correspondence waiting on his desk. The council meeting set for noon, meant to finalize his engagement terms, was cancelled without explanation. For 2 days, he withdrew, refused formal duties, walked the upper terraces until his boots were soaked in morning dew. Spoke to no one, answered nothing. On the 3rd day, he sent for the children's coats and quietly requested 3 horses to be saddled. No retinue, no guards. No one knew where the prince was going. Only that he carried both children in front of him on horseback, their arms clasped around his waist, their faces tucked beneath his coat. They rode down the mountain path in silence. By the time they reached the village at the foot of the hills, it was late afternoon. A soft wind moved through the crooked chimneys, and the marketplace had begun to empty. Sebastian dismounted outside a modest stone shop, its wooden sign painted with the faded image of a honeybee. A bell rang above the door as they stepped inside. The scent was immediate and overwhelming: browned sugar, warm butter, crushed almonds, and the faintest hint of lemon. The air inside was sweet and golden, thick with the breath of ovens still cooling from their morning labor. Behind the counter, bent over a tray of fresh tartlets, stood Celeste. Her sleeves were dusted with flour. A smudge of raspberry had settled at her wrist. Her hair was tied back in the same familiar knot, though a lock had escaped near her ear. She looked up at the sound of the bell and saw them. Her breath left her body. She did not speak. Neither did he. Sebastian stepped forward with a kind of quiet that carried more weight than any proclamation. His coat was plain, his hands empty. The children stood just behind him, one to each side, watching without blinking. He took one more step forward and removed his gloves slowly, as though undressing from formality itself. "I'm not here as a prince," he said, voice low, steady. "Not as a ruler or a father. I'm here as a man who has chosen you." Celeste's lips parted, but no sound came. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter. "I'm not choosing between duty and love anymore," he continued. "That's a false choice. I've done what was expected of me. I've endured silence, made peace with grief, worn my role like armor. But I won't lose you, too." The silence in the shop shifted, warm with the scent of pastry and impossible hope. "I came to find you," he said, "because everything worth saving in my world begins with you." Behind him, Lucien reached for his sister's hand. Celeste's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Her breath caught once, sharply, as if something inside her had broken free. He didn't kneel. He didn't ask. He only waited. And slowly, she stepped out from behind the counter, the scent of vanilla and yeast clinging to her like memory. She didn't speak either. She simply reached for his hand. News of the moment traveled back to Chateau Montbrun in a single breath and spread through the court like wildfire. That the prince had entered a village bakery and made his intentions known, not in secret, but in full view of the public, shocked the nobility to silence. Lady Violette, upon hearing the news, retired from court for an extended visit to her sister's estate in the north. The council could not undo what had already been seen. Weeks later, a formal announcement was posted in the palace gardens and delivered to each of the kingdom's regional offices. Miss Celeste Chevalier was to be installed as official guardian and educator to the royal children by order of His Highness Prince Sébastien de Castelnau. Her presence was to be considered permanent and unchallengeable. No engagement was declared, no ceremony scheduled. But in the prince's private study, with the doors closed and the sunlight falling through the high windows, Sébastien took her hand and whispered, "I will marry you, without audience, without crown, only truth." She answered with a kiss and with her heart. It was spring again by the time the garden bloomed in full. Celeste stood beneath the budding linden trees, their green still delicate and bright. The air carried the promise of warmth, and petals fell around her like soft, pale rain. Her dress was simple, a soft ivory wool without ornament. In one hand, she held Adélaïde's small fingers. The girl smiled up at her, no longer silent, no longer afraid. Lucien ran ahead of them toward the kitchen doors, a linen napkin trailing from his hand like a banner. His laughter rang across the flagstones, light and clear. Sébastien approached from the opposite path. His expression was softened, his shoulders unburdened. There was no crown on his head, no sash across his chest, only an open gaze and the steps of a man returning home. She turned toward him. They did not speak. They did not need to. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.